are ready to make yourself a big deal, then this is for you. So I recently wrote a post about how we learn to make everything else around us a big deal. I was talking about how, in my experience, I learned to make UN a big deal, my job in the UN a big deal, to a point that it would dictate everything about my life, right? It would dictate everything about how I feel every day, where do I go to work, with whom do I work, under which conditions I work. All of this would be dictated by that UN job. And the reason why that would be is because I've made my UN job such a big deal that is even more important than myself until I realize that I cannot live my life that way. And I coach on this so often with my humanitarian clients because one of my missions in life is to help them release and get rid of their dependencies on what they don't want to be dependent on. And it doesn't mean that they will stop working or they will stop working for UN or anything, but they will know who is the big deal here. Is it the job or the system or yourself? And I wanted to really do this live session today is to bring awareness to how, as long as we keep making the system a big deal, the job is a big deal. I was just coaching a client today, this morning, where we were working on some of her health goals so that she has the balance and the work-life balance that she wants. And we were discussing how she's amazing at fulfilling every promise, everything that she said to her boss. But when it comes to promising to herself, she just does not know how to do that. And we were also discussing how her keeping her promise to herself starts with her seeing herself as a big deal, as an important person that needs respect and following through what she said she would do to herself, right? And she was telling me that she does not really feel that she is important in her own life. But when it comes to work, when it comes to other people, all of them are important, but herself, not so much. And that probably is something that we all can resonate, and I certainly have worked on it so long and so much to realize that all of this, where we exhaust ourselves, where we burn ourselves out, where we sacrifice everything that we have for the sake of a job, for the sake of a system, comes from believing that that is a big deal, but we who we are not so much. And that has a lot of grave consequences, right? That's how we compromise a lot. That's how we sacrifice a lot of the things. How we sacrifice our health. That's how we sacrifice our emotional well-being. All because we consider something else or someone else to be such a big deal that our lives evolve around them. But I have even noticed more of the tendency recently as I coach, and I keep observing this, is that we tend to make a big deal of our obligations beyond our job. Our obligations are the big deal to an extent that we feel guilty if we follow doing what we want. Right? We rather choose our obligations because we find them so important that we are not allowing ourselves to even understand and look at what are the deepest desires that we have. So if we were to weigh and give importance to what to follow, we all are trained to follow our obligations. We are all trained to follow our job or whatever it requires us to do. and not so much of what we desire and who we really are. And I would love for you today to start looking at your life and see how it looks like when you make yourself a big deal versus all the things around you. And for some people, you may not know how to do that. For others, you may even immediately recognize and you're like, oh, yes, I see now, and I want to make myself a big deal. Because as long as we keep making everything else a big deal, we keep reinforcing that dependency, that addiction, that dominance over our lives. And it may work to some people or it may work in some seasons, but if we keep doing it a long term at the expense of what our desires are and who we are, then we may not like that in the long run, or we may feel resentment, or we may feel like we're always doing something that others want, always doing something that others require, always following the obligations and feeling empty or hollow, or feeling like we're not fulfilled, feeling like we're not recognizing all the ways of who we want to be and what are the desires we want to pursue. So instead of, I'm not really asking you to choose between the dominance of like making something else a big deal or making ourselves a big deal. I'm asking you if you can make yourself a big deal first before making other things a big deal. And if you can, I would like for you to start understanding how that looks like for you. And I have realized for myself, and I would like to share my experience of how I have done it, is when I have realized that who I am as a person, what principles, what values I hold as a person, if I follow them more, everything else fall into place as well. Everything else start working the way that I want, and even better than ever before, because I stopped forcing myself, because I stopped doing everything needed for other people or everything needed for my job and making it a big deal all the time, and keep ignoring myself. And the more I ignored myself, the more depressed and burnt out I got. Right? So in order not to burn myself out and in order not to go to a depressive life experience, I have realized that if I know how to make my life, who I am, a big deal, then everything else fall into places. And the way that I have done it is understanding, okay, who I am as the person who keeps my own promises to myself. So if I say this is how I want to experience my life in daily basis, this is how I want to experience my personal life. This is, for instance, how when I go to bed, this is how I work. This is how many hours I work, and this is when I don't work. When I follow my, when I honor my words to myself, then I showed myself how I am the big deal in my life. And it's not my job, or it's not my obligations, it's not whatever else, but rather who I am becomes the big deal to myself. And not a big deal in the egoistical sense, obviously, right? So don't even get into like, oh, if I am doing this, then I must be an egoist, then I must be this, and I must be that. Don't go into a judgment mode, because you are not even there yet to be on the other extreme of being an egoist. We're simply recognizing that who you are as a person is worthy, amazing, valuable, respectable, a big deal, for who you are, for the values that you have, for the principles and desires that you have. And we are learning to recognize those over any obligations, over any other things that we're so used to doing or we're so trained to doing. Right? So, and it doesn't even mean that don't do all the other work for work purposes as well. Just notice that if you are able to promise something at work and fulfill it, you can do that in your personal life as well. And the only reason you might not be doing it is because you haven't considered yourself and your dreams and your desires so important and big deal that you haven't honored your words to yourself. So I have decided that one of the main shifts that needs to change in my own life to make myself a big deal in my own life is to realize that if I'm saying this is what I'm going to do for my well-being, for my health, I'm doing it. It is as important or even more important than the big deal that I'm making that are around my job. Right? The same, I was coaching a client today and I was telling her because she wants to improve her sleep patterns and she wants to get back to healthy eating patterns and losing some weight. And in that regard, we were saying that, okay, if you say you are someone who is so good at fulfilling the promise of doing things the way that you promise to do for work purposes, you are able to do that for your personal purpose as well. And in order to do that, you need to start feeling and seeing yourself as important, if not more important, to be honoring the words that you say to yourself. And it starts with small practices of, okay, let's say that you've promised yourself that you will go to bed around this hour without the phone, without the distractions, without the scrolling and all of this. Then that's what you're doing. Even your brain wants to come up with all the reasons why you can't do that and all the reasons why you shouldn't and all of this. But you're honoring yourself and your big dealness, your importance to yourself by honoring the words that you promised to yourself. And it can start with simple acts like these. And then in my case, I also started looking at, okay, what are who I am in an honest, genuine, authentic way showing up in the world. How do I do that? And I want to honor that in my all of interactions. That's how I show that I am a big deal to myself. I am important to myself. And the way that I have been doing that is by practicing every interaction I have, instead of people pleasing others and making them more important or making my fear more important, I started making my authentic, genuine, honest, showing up self more important. And like start noticing also, oh, if I make my fear more important, then I people please. If I make other people's judgments more important, then I don't show up authentically, genuinely, honestly the way I want to. Right? So you can see that how us not making ourselves a big deal or making ourselves not important shows up in our everyday work, everyday interactions everywhere. So the reason why we're not able to show up the way we want to and be thriving and standing for what we want to, the reason why we don't is somehow we're considering we're not as important as our fear or as their judgment or as them, and therefore we are belittling or we are constraining, we are limiting ourselves, and then wondering why we got drained in that conversation. So this is applicable to everything that you do practically is as long as you make your fear a big deal, your interactions or judgments of other people a big deal, your job a big deal, your stability in that company a big deal, then you will be at their mercy, and you will be only showing up in the frameworks of what they allow, or in the frameworks of what your fear allows you. And that's very constraining, and that's often not who we really are. But we are willing to do that because we have deemed them more important than ourselves. And this shows up also in humanitarians who are transitioning to the private sector, or humanitarians transitioning to becoming their own bosses. The way that it shows up is they say, oh, I can't charge this much money, or I'm not that important enough, or my expertise are not that important, so therefore they're going to offer whatever money and I'm going to accept it. Right? It is everywhere. Like if you look at around, how we find ourselves important or not decides what we can get in life or not, how we show up in life and how we don't show up in life. So that's why I would really encourage you to start looking at what other things you have been making important more than yourself and why. And if you started making yourself important, then what needs to change around you? What needs to change around how you treat yourself? What needs to change around how you honor your promises to yourself? What needs to change around how you show up in interactions with other people? And the more you start seeing that, okay, my honesty and my authentic self and my genuine way of showing up is more important than my fear, then you start liberating yourself. The same goes, my well-being is more important, and my abilities of making whatever I want happen is more important than me keep my dependency on that system. Then the liberation starts happening. You start feeling free to be able to do whatever you want to. But in order for us to do that, we need to start understanding that who we are and what we stand for are more important than the dependencies, than the fear, than the judgments of other people, or than the obligations. If we can start seeing this way, then we have more agency and power over how we dominate our lives and how we live our lives. So if you'd like to work on this, to finally see how you are more important than anything your dependencies are saying, then come coach with me. I would love to support you in this process. In the meantime, have a beautiful weekend.